bit over 2 years ago now, James Gunn took over DC Studios and confirmed a reboot. The first project in this new DCU was to be Creature Commandos. And now we finally arrived. The first 2 episodes of Creature Commandos have been released, officially beginning the DCU. In this video, I'll be reviewing both of these episodes, but before doing so with each one, I'll be detailing everything we learned about the DCU from them, something I'll continue to do for every episode going forward on a week-to-week basis. Make sure to subscribe to keep up with my reviews and help me get to 100,000 subscribers. Let's begin with episode 1. Episode 1 is titled The Collywobbles and establishes a good amount about the DCU, although some of it we did already know. The events of the Suicide Squad are mentioned, said to have taken place in Corto Maltese, involving Project Starfish and therefore most likely Starro, and the involvement of Weasel, who had a really bad time. Rick Flag Jr.'s death is mentioned as well, with Senior confirming that he's 18 years older than his son, pretty close to the 14-year age gap of the actors, which does justify it, I guess. That death is mentioned to have taken place 2 years prior to the events of Creature Commandos, meaning the show, while releasing in 2024, actually takes place in 2022. At least that is, if the timeline of the Suicide Squad and Peacemaker from the DCEU remain intact. The Suicide Squad took place in 2020, this is 2 years later, so 2022. It could also be 2023. Speaking of Peacemaker, the events of Season 1, specifically where Waller's daughter, Leota Adebayo, outed her and Task Force X, are mentioned, and are now also therefore canon, as well as the reason the Creature Commandos now exist. I do mention this in spite of the fact that James Gunn did say that the entirety of the events of Season 1 of Peacemaker, except for the Justice League scene, are canon, but he also said that it is only canon if it's mentioned, so I decided to go over that. The episode pretty quickly also introduces Cersei, who has an inconsistent pronunciation in the show, but I prefer Cersei over Cersei, so I'll stick to that. What we learn about the DCU here is that Themyscira is common knowledge, although debated in its existence, suggesting that Wonder Woman has been around for a good while. The news shows an image of some Themyscirans as well as potentially Themyscira, but it seems to me to not be the real ones, who I really doubt will dress like this in Paradise Lost or at any point in the DCU. It's likely just a photo shoot that is meant to look like how they think Themyscirans look. Finally, we learn from the episode that either Zac Efron exists as a real celebrity in this universe, or Zac Efron will be playing an in-universe celebrity that is not Zac Efron. Maybe it's Booster Gold. That would not be terrible casting, honestly. But enough about all that, let's get into the review. Before we get into the individual episode, I have to discuss things that will be true for the entire series. First of all, I really like the art style. It's detailed, but not too detailed, quite unique in how thick the borders are, and generally fitting for the series. I say that because, at least in these 2 episodes, the animation and visuals are really top tier. The voice acting is pretty great as well. I was kind of worried that since they cast at least a few characters with live action appearances in mind, that maybe they would come off as unprofessional voice actors, with the exception of Alan Tudyk, since they are primarily live action actors, but generally they were really good. I was especially surprised by how great Frank Grillo was here, and how well his voice fit the character, and also how much personality the character had. The writing is pretty good so far as well. The dialogue in these first 2 episodes is compelling and effective in basically whatever it's trying to do, whether that be exposition, character dynamics, characteristics, or even humor. I laughed a few times in these episodes. With this being a James Gunn project, music is obviously front and center, with carefully picked needle drops that suit their scenes really well. So far, the music hasn't blown me away or anything, but I just love how James Gunn uses music in his projects, how much personality the music choices have, and how unique they are to each project or franchise. I also really like the intro, if nothing else because I just always prefer an actual intro for a show over the title card laziness that's propped up over the last few years. Peacemaker showed how important a good intro could be by being one of the best of all time. This intro is definitely not quite on that level, but I love this type of intro too, showcasing the main characters and actors portraying them with a song that will now forever be associated with this intro, alongside unique visuals. I'm really happy with what we got here. Episode 1 begins with a solid 5 minutes of setup, setting up the villain, the conflict, the setting, the concept, and most of the main characters. It's mostly things that we already knew from trailers, but also it'd be weird to leave out information from the series because it's in the trailer. There are people who watch things without watching trailers, and honestly, I found these first few minutes to be very well handled exposition and character introductions, doing everything rather quickly and in a very concise and to the point manner. The rest of the episode builds upon that, and mostly successfully doing so, expanding on most of the concepts introduced early on. Pakolistan has a really unique aesthetic, making for an interesting setting with unique visuals, as well as one surprisingly funny character in that one guard who loves old American references. The character dynamics established here are mostly pretty great. G.I. Robot constantly referencing Nazis is funny, and there's hints of a brewing friendship with Nina Mazursky, which is already quite sweet. Later, we get a very different, more antagonistic dynamic between the bride and Nina, which is expanded upon really well in episode 2. Nina has been mostly paired up with others so far, but she had this one moment on her own that I really liked, where a kid waved at her before her mother pulled her away, showing how hatred of people who are different is something that's learned, which I'm sure will be a focus on her backstory that we'll see in the future. It also shows, alongside the moment where the bride and Nina take a cab, that people aren't actually too shocked to see monsters walking around, likely because of how common metas, aliens, magical people, and vigilantes are in the present day. The standout character for me in this episode was easily Rick Flag Sr. Like I mentioned, Frank Grillo's voice fits the character really well. He also has a bit of a fun personality, not quite the no-nonsense leader I was expecting, which is definitely a good thing. It makes him a lot more of a fun character. More than anything, I'm loving the focus that's being put on the death of his son. There's a great moment early on where Waller references it, and then later on when Flag reflects on his son's death, which was a true highlight of the episode. He and Ilana have great chemistry, even if, I'll be honest, Ilana, whose name I've been pronouncing wrong for like a year and a half now, is a very one-note character in these 2 episodes. I mean, her only character trait thus far is that she is inexplicably, incredibly horny for Flag. Flag was a highlight action-wise as well, as he and Phosphorus's fight is pretty awesome, fantastically animated, and with great visuals. The fight is exciting and engaging, while also establishing some key characteristics of Flag and Phosphorus. I didn't love the song that was playing in this scene, I didn't hate it either, but I think maybe the scene would have been better with just regular score instead of a needle drop. The episode had a decent ending as well, setting up everything that has to do with the Frankensteins, leading really well into being properly expanded on in episode 2. All in all, this episode was really fun, with some great character dynamics and dialogue, exciting animation and action, great world building, and simply acting as a fantastic foundation for the series going forward. Nothing about the episode truly blew me away, but this is definitely a great one, deserving of an 8 out of 10, and a very good start to the show. Episode 2 is titled Tourmaline Necklace, and has a very clear focus on one character in particular, the bride. Everything we learned about the DCU from this episode has to do with the bride and the Frankensteins. We learned that she was created in 1831 and is therefore nearly 200 years old, with the same going for Eric Frankenstein, who was likely created a few years prior. The episode then ends with a montage leading into the 21st century, showing the bride and Frankenstein's quote-unquote relationship throughout the centuries, showcasing a bit of an alternate history where the Frankensteins seem to be not too abnormal to people who aren't really freaking out that much about them, and Frankenstein even served in World War II like the comics, although this time not with the creature Commandos. That montage was, in my opinion, a really great closing to the episode and a really great end to a really good story. The bride's origin, as shown in this episode, is quite compelling. Throughout, Eric Frankenstein is put into a very disturbing light, which successfully makes you feel bad for the bride just for having to deal with him, himself making for an entertaining and very interesting take on the character. The same goes for Victor Frankenstein, who's kind and caring, and whose relationship with the bride is also a compelling one, creating a very interesting twist in that she was created to be the bride of Frankenstein, but ended up falling in love with the wrong one. This all came together rather effectively in making for a very disturbing and compelling origins for the 2 Frankensteins, establishing them as very unique and very interesting characters who I'm looking forward to see more of. This all culminated in the previously mentioned 200-year-long montage, which kind of establishes Frankenstein as the bride's archenemy, although he doesn't really see it that way, and I generally love this scene. It also had my favorite needle drop thus far. In the present, the bride and Nina go to Frankenstein's mansion, leading into a conflict with Circe and the Sons of Themyscira. The bride's fight against the Sons was a cool scene with some decent action and animation, although it did kind of make Nina come off as completely useless, making you wonder why she's here. As for Circe, so far she hasn't really had much to do in terms of her character, and she has not had almost any dialogue, so I'll reserve judgment on that for later. But if nothing else, I loved her design, I love the way her powers look, and I really loved her fight against the bride. That fight was, yet again, really well animated, but also it was really brutal and really hard-hitting. It made both characters feel very powerful and resilient, but also just enough to do proper damage to each other. While the bride was winning, I was left wondering how Cersei even posed a threat to the Commandos as a team, but it seems like she was maybe holding back as she whips out the very OP ability to turn the bride's arms into wacky waving inflatable arm flailing tube men. Makes me wonder why she didn't do that earlier, but hey, then we would have missed out on a great fight scene, and a really brutal one at that, which also cut together really well with the bride's origin. I love the editing of this part of the episode. The B plot focuses on Ilana continuing to be a very one-note character defined by her horniness for Flag, but I definitely cannot deny their chemistry. Also, Phosphorus commenting on it was pretty funny at the very least. All in all, the episode had elements of it that I felt like were improved over the first, other things that weren't as good, and most things were just on par. I love the bride's origin, and I am disturbed by this version of Frankenstein, but generally I think the first two episodes are pretty much equal in quality, meaning this episode also deserves an 8, which, again, is a pretty great start to this show, and also the universe. Speaking of the universe, something very interesting came out with the first episode. Looking forward, a trailer was released for the weeks ahead, and one part was kind of crazy. Cersei shows the Commandos a vision of the future, which shows many heroes killed. This will technically be Superman and Mr. Terrific's debuts in this universe, as well as Peacemaker's first official appearance in the DCU. But what's more important than that are the confirmations of the existences of two heroes not previously confirmed. Very clearly seen here is unmistakably Starfire, wearing a suit that looks exactly like her rebirth suit. She is presumably going to be a member of the Teen Titans, who are going to be getting a live-action movie in this universe. Behind her is who seems to be Captain Atom, although that's not quite as clear. Captain Atom has been hinted by Gunn, but not officially confirmed. Again, it's not quite clear, but still, even if that isn't Captain Atom, and all we got from this is the confirmation of Starfire's existence, then this is still the most important information we've learned about the DCU from Creature Commandos, more so than anything from the first two episodes. Also, it seems like maybe the DCU is leading up to some sort of apocalyptic event, if this is a real vision of the future. Scenes like these are why Creature Commandos has limitless potential for world building. Because it's animated, they could put in whoever they want without even having to think about it. And I'm really excited to see what we learn about the DCU in the episodes to come. Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below about the first two episodes of Creature Commandos, and thanks for watching.